So this is part two of the simplex method, and I'm just going to pick a problem here and just do it. You'll notice that on this one my variables have changed a little bit because I'm not a big fan of the little sub 1s and sub 2s. So I've made my slack variables a and b here instead of s sub 1 and s sub 2. I've made my maximum minimum question here, or problem, the function of p of xy. So again, I use that as, the book uses that as z. I'm not a real big, huge disturbance for me for you to change the variables, as long as you know that these are your slack variables and this is your maximum variable. The simplex method works with either one of those. Okay, so we can take our inequalities, we convert them with our slack variables. We have our non-negative values for x and y, and then our slack variables a and b. And then I went ahead and I converted my maximum function into set it equal to 0, so I could put it in my simplex tableau. So then we're taking these information and putting it in our tableau gives us this tableau. And now it's all about the pivot. So again, rule number 3 says locate the pivot element by looking on the bottom row and finding the smallest number, which would be -5. This becomes my pivot column. And now I have to decide, is it going to be pivoted on 3 or 4? So I take 78 divided by 3, 36 divided by 4, determine that 26 is bigger than 9, so 4 becomes my pivot element. So there it is. So what do I have to do to 4 to get it to become a 1? I need to take 1/4 of row 2 and put it back in row 2. And that gives me this one right here. Of course, now that also gives me some other stuff that I gotta deal with online. Then next, now again, once I've set that as my pivot point, I can determine that that's my first variable. And I need to make these zeros. So I'm going to take -3 times row 2, add it to row 1, put it back in row 1. Take 5 times row 2, add it to row 3, and put it back in row 3. When I do that, I end up with this one. Am I done? According to the instructions on step 5, you have reached your maximum as long as there are no negative numbers in the bottom row, and I do have one. So I'm not finished yet. This is my pivot column. Now have to determine which is my pivot element. 51 divided by 17/4 and 9 divided by 1/4 gives me 12 or 36. And 12 would be my pivot element distinction because it's smaller. So that means that 17/4 is the one that I have to turn into 1. What do I need to do to that? I need to multiply 4/7 times row 1 and put it back in row 1. And when I do that, then this is what happens to my equation, or to my row. And of course, that column then has to be turned into zeros. So what do I need? I need to take -1/4 times row 1, add it to row 2, put it back in row 2, take 11/4 times row 1, add it to row 3, and put it back in row 3. Which leads you to this simplex tableau. So I've got my x here, I've got my y here. Now am I done? Look at the last row. There are no negatives there. So we have maximized our variable for z. It's at 78. And again, we called it P of xy to begin with, so that's at 78. What values give me that 78? X is 6, gives me that value, and y is 12, gives me that value. And even though we see these information here, remember, this is a slack variable, so I'm not really considering what I'm doing with them because they need to be positive values. So I'm not going to worry too much about that, but I can see that when I get my value for z, a and b are both going to be zeros. And again, there's a lot of information here. We're not going to be worried about that for now. We just want to be able to find out the original x, y, and the profit function to maximize when we get down here to our answers. All right, so yes, there are some videos on this. They go a little bit farther, some of them do, than what we're going to right now. We have 2 more sections in this chapter. We're going to talk about all those weird things that can happen. But for now, the assignments that are in here, follow those steps on page 282 perfectly. There's several examples in the textbook for you to look at. We are planning on having a Zoom meeting, so tune in for that, and I will talk to you later.